The series begins with a wail of sirens and a male voice asking a man if he can hear him. A paramedic calls in the condition of the man. The narrator starts by saying that he was hit by a truck. A man is wheeled into the hospital and we see a monitor. The narrator sounds confused about all the fuss. The machines start to beep furiously, and the doctors ask the man if he can hear them. The scene fades to black. The narrator concedes the fact that he is dying, and he says that he should have at least lost his virginity before he died. We hear frantic voices and a woman wailing. The man's eyes open and he thinks he's still alive. The faces of two happy humans, a man and a woman, come into his line of vision. They are speaking a language he does not understand and the narrator is confused. The male human picks him up and kisses him. He protests because he still thinks he is a grown man. The woman also picks him up. He is happy about that because she has large breasts and he is happy to be in contact with them. He tries to stretch his hands to touch her breasts and finds out that he has baby hands. It dawns on him that he is a baby. He has been reincarnated. He finds out that his new parents are called Paul and Zenith. He guesses that they are in their mid-20s and is jealous of them for having children so young. The boy's name is Rudeus, and 6 months have passed. He now understands the language. The narrator introduces the viewers to Lilia, his family's maid, and says that he is a huge fan of her talents. At 6 months, Rudeus is a terror and always gets into places he is not supposed to be. He wears a pair of panties on his head as a joke. Zenith finds him and gently corrects him. Zenith notices that Lilia does not look good and asks her what the matter is. Lilia complains about Rudeus's actions and expresses her fears that he may be afflicted by something. Zenith dismisses her fears by telling her that Rudeus is just a baby and he doesn't know any better. Rudeus looks out the window at the picturesque views of the countryside and guesses that his new home is somewhere in Europe. He says the view is nice, but he has never wanted to live too far out of town in a place without electricity or gas. He likes being reincarnated, but he misses his computer. He catches sight of Paul practicing his swordsmanship in the yard, and it startles him, which leads to him falling off the window and hitting his head. He cries out, and Zenith carries him and soothes him. Lilia is concerned that Rudeus does not cry much after such a fall. Zenith uses a healing spell on Rudeus, who scoffs at the spell at first but is awestruck afterward. Paul comes in to check on his family, and Zenith explains to him what happened. She is taken aback and frantic, but Paul soothes her and helps her to calm down. Time skips 2 years ahead, and we meet 2-year-old Rudeus. He wonders about magic, and if his mother will teach him magic. He goes off in search of her and finds a chest of books instead. Time skips forward again, and Rudeus has taught himself to read. He reads the books on magic and tries to cast a spell on his own. It works, and he conjures up a water ball by speaking the incantation. He wonders if he can perform magic without speaking. He tries wordless magic and it works, but he passes out right after. He tries again and again. Rudeus discovers that magic grows more when you use it, and spells can work without any incantations. There just has to be the intention. The most important lesson he learns is not to believe everything he reads. Rudeus spends a lot of time thinking about incantations. He pores over the book again and again. He concludes that he needs to hone his skills while he is young if he wants to be excellent at it. While Paul practices his swordsmanship and the neighbor women drool over him, Rudeus conjures a water ball and splashes his father. He has finally mastered how to send water flying. He now understands that spells have an order of operation, calling forth the element, setting the size, setting the speed, and releasing it. He is happy about his success with mastering basic magic, and wants to try intermediate magic. He recites a spell that summons a mini tsunami that blows off a corner of the house. His parents think he's heard it first, but Zenith finds the spell book open and asks if he read any part of the book out loud. When he apologizes, she squeals in delight and calls him a genius. Paul and Zenith argue about Rudeus's education in magic and the sword arts, and Lilia intervenes by proposing a schedule in which Rudeus is taught magic in the mornings and sword arts in the afternoon. Paul and Zenith agree with that and make. They hire a magic tutor for Rudeus, a young demon named Roxy Magurdia. Rudeus loves her and blurts out that she is so little. She mutters rude things about Rudeus under her breath when she's introduced to him, and expresses doubt in his ability to comprehend magical theory. She accepts the job and begins immediately. She explains to Rudeus that there are only 3 types of magic: attack, healing, and summoning magic. She also explains that spells and the mages that can cast them are divided into 7 categories: elementary, intermediate, advanced, saint, king, emperor, and god. She explains to Rudeus the type of magic power needed to power a spell. Roxy shows Rudeus an incantation. She calls forth a water ball, sends it out, and ends up breaking Zenith's favorite tree. She heals it right after. Rudeus conjures a water ball with an abridged incantation and confesses to Roxy that he does not use incantations when casting spells. She is shocked and in awe. Zenith's tree falls apart again, and she scolds Roxy for breaking it. Rudeus apologizes and encourages Roxy, who thanks him for the encouragement. Zenith invites Roxy to dinner, which ends up being a welcome feast for Roxy. Rudeus is heartened by this and is determined to be a better person in his reincarnation. The episode begins at the scene of a funeral ceremony for two people. Incense is lit and the mourners pay their last respects, but there is an empty seat, presumably for an important family member. The scene cuts to a man in a filthy apartment jerking off to what he is watching on his computer. Three men enter the apartment building. One is armed with a bat, and they make their way up to the filthy apartment. The armed men barge into the apartment and the man is stunned. He gets up to fight the men, and one of them breaks his computer with a bat, and another calls him a filthy degenerate. He is thrown out of the apartment and into the rainy night barefoot. He walks along the street when he sees two boys accosting a girl. A truck is swinging right down the street in their direction. He calls out to them, but they don't hear him, so he steps into the road. Rudeus's eyes open. He is surrounded by the figures he made using earth magic. He makes them vanish. He hears his parents copulating loudly, and decides to head down the hall to their bedroom to mess with them. On his way, he comes across Roxy in front of their door, listening and responding to Paul and Zenith's noises. He makes his way back to his room, determined to forget that he saw Roxy. 6 months pass with Roxy as Rudeus's magic teacher. At this time, he can use intermediate magic. He enjoys his lessons, which have progressed to include classroom lessons in the evenings. Roxy reads to Rudeus, and he listens rapidly. She tells him she's a demon. She recalls that Rudeus's parents were taken aback when they first met because of the color of her hair. She tells Rudeus about the green-haired demons called Superds, who are scary and led a killing spree during the last war. She tells him they killed everyone, their enemies and allies alike, and were banished from the demon continent because they were seen as too violent to coexist with other demons. She teaches Rudeus how to recognize them and to stay away from them. Rudeus flatters Roxy and the lesson ends. A year after Roxy starts teaching Rudeus, his magic aptitude improves. He does magic at an advanced level, and he never runs out of mana. His swordplay needs much to be desired, much to the amusement of his mother. Rudeus remembers being mocked in his past life and gets sad when he sees two boys playing beyond the fence. Roxy tells him about her village, and Rudeus hopes she stays with his family forever. Roxy talks to Rudeus about the possibility of him studying at the University of Magic in Renoa. Time passes, and Rudeus is 5 years old. His parents threw him a huge party. Paul gives him a real sword and a speech about protecting the people he loves. Zenith gets Rudeus a magic spellbook, and Roxy gives Rudeus a wand. Roxy talks about Rudeus's graduation exam. Rudeus has a fear of leaving the house because he was bullied mercilessly in his past life. Roxy takes Rudeus across the village for his graduation exam. At first, Rudeus is afraid of leaving the house, thinking that the people in the village will laugh at him and mock him, but he realizes that the people in the village are friendly. He is heartened when the villagers greet Roxy warmly and have a good rapport with them. He realizes that the villagers are not scared of Roxy, even though she's an outsider, and they look to rely on her also. Rudeus starts to conquer his fear of being around other people. Rudeus's final exam is to cast the cumulonimbus spell. When Roxy casts the spell to show Rudeus, lightning strikes Caravaggio the horse. Roxy is apologetic about that, and she heals him and creates a safe fortress using earth magic so that lightning does not strike him twice. Rudeus casts the cumulonimbus spell very well, and Roxy concludes their lessons and pronounces Rudeus a saint-class water mage. Roxy leaves to travel the world and bestows an amulet on Rudeus before she goes. Rudeus thanks her for all their help, and there is a teary send-off for Roxy. Rudeus asks his parents for permission to play outside the house. He talks to his parents about his behavior, and Paul gives him a lecture about being kind and using his strength to protect the weak. He takes a walk through the village, enjoying being able to be outside without fear. Rudeus walks into some boys bullying someone and scares them off by throwing clods of earth at them like they were throwing stones at the boy. He recognizes that the boy being bullied looks like a Superd because of his green hair. The boy does not have a gem on his forehead but has weird ears. He strikes up a conversation with the boy and finds out that the boy is half human and a quarter elf. He cries about his hair color. Rudeus becomes friends with the boy and introduces himself to the boy, who says his name is Sylph. Rudeus is impressed by the boy's name and plays with the boy. Sylph asks if he can do magic like Rudeus, and Rudeus offers to train him to do magic. He gets home to meet an upset Paul. Paul is upset because one of the mothers brought her son to report to Paul that Rudeus punched him. He yells at Rudeus about the incident and makes it clear that he does not intend to hear Rudeus out. Rudeus talks back at him in a sharp tone and gets slapped for talking back at Paul. Rudeus gets angry and he talks to his father sternly. He explains in a sarcastic tone, and Paul is embarrassed. Paul apologizes and asks for an explanation. Rudeus explains to Paul that he used Paul's teaching about protecting the weak to stop Sylph from being bullied, and Paul gets sad about his behavior towards Rudeus. Zenith asks Paul what the matter is, and they talk. Paul is concerned about what happened with Rudeus, and declares that talking to Rudeus is like talking to a mature person. Rudeus practices swordplay during the summer, as he trains Sylph in magic. Sylph asks him to show him how to cast spells silently. He explains exactly how he does it, but Sylph doesn't seem to get it until he tries it by himself and gradually gets the hang of it. When he does, he celebrates wildly by running jubilantly through a field of wheat, accompanied by Rudeus. Tired from all the celebration, they lie in the grass, and Rudeus thinks about Sylph's looks and remembers his friend from his old life, who was supermodel beautiful. It begins to rain, and Rudeus and Sylph run to Rudeus's home. They meet Lilia at home and she draws a bath for them. Sylph is embarrassed about getting undressed around Rudeus. Sylph takes off his clothes and stands in his bloomers. Rudeus tries to coax Sylph into taking off his clothes and getting into the bath with him so he does not catch a cold. Sylph refuses, and Rudeus, unable to take a hint, undresses Sylph rather violently and finds out that Sylph is a girl. Sylph cries, and Rudeus realizes his mistake. Sylph is herded away, and Rudeus is remorseful. Paul talks to Rudeus about consent and being respectful. He learns that Sylph's full name is Sylphiette, and Paul tells him to apologize to her. Rudeus asks if Sylph will ever forgive him, and Paul tells him if his apology is sincere, Sylph will forgive him. Paul soothes his fears. Rudeus apologizes to Sylph, and his apology makes her cry because of the words he uses and the way he says them. During swordplay lessons, Rudeus is having an off day. Paul asks him if he is still having trouble making up with Sylph, and he replies in the affirmative. He is also upset because his swordsmanship has not improved either. Paul gives him advice to show Sylph his softer side and be vulnerable with her. He tells Rudeus to be honest with Sylph and tell her his feelings, no matter what. Rudeus confesses his feelings to Sylph. She takes his hands and consoles him. Paul thinks that Rudeus may have taken his advice a little too well. Rudeus and Sylph agree to remain friends, and Paul hugs them both. Zenith is pregnant. Rudeus congratulates her, and she tells him she knows he'll be an excellent big brother to his little sibling. Paul and Zenith are overjoyed. Lilia confesses that she is also pregnant. Paul confesses to being the father of Lilia's baby. Zenith slaps him in anger. Lilia and Zenith talk about the future. Paul tries to butt in, but Zenith yells at him. Zenith ponders her next move in the face of Paul's betrayal of their marriage. Rudeus steps in and talks to his mother about the situation. This further angers Zenith. Rudeus implicates Paul and tries to save Lilia. He concocts a story in which Paul is the villain, and Lilia is the powerless maid who is helpless against his demands, and manages to convince his mother to let Lilia stay. She accepts and asks Lilia to stay. Zenith is very angry with Paul. Lilia cries in relief. Paul takes his anger out on Rudeus. Lilia stands by the window and watches them while thinking about how she seduced Paul. She left her door open while bathing so Paul could see, and he slipped into her bedchamber. Lilia thinks she should have been punished, and recognizes Rudeus's role in her forgiveness. She talks about her feelings about Rudeus, and concludes that she owes him her respect. She vows to pledge her child to Rudeus's service when they grow up. Zenith and Lilia both give birth to the girls. Zenith's daughter is named Norn, and Lilia's daughter is named Aisha. Paul dotes on both of his daughters, and is often caught doing silly things for them. Rudeus thinks Paul is uncool, and decides that he will be the cool male model to his little sisters. After Rudeus helps Lilia, she warms up to him and tells him stories of his father's younger days. Rudeus compares his sword-fighting prowess to his father's. Paul is advanced in all three sword-fighting styles, and this makes Rudeus lose hope in himself. Paul tries to perk him up, but Rudeus is borderline rude to him. Paul takes the opportunity to speak to Rudeus about his friendship with Sylphie. He also talks about attending school, and Rudeus seems to warm to this. Paul jokes about Rudeus attending school after learning how to read and write. Sylphie practices wind magic at their spot under the tree, as Rudeus thinks about school and how he might like to attend school. He talks to Sylphie about how stuck he feels, and hints just a little at wanting to go elsewhere, but Sylphie gets emotional and cries about it. Rudeus gets a letter from Roxy, in which she tells of her travels and working as a mage in the court of the Sharoon Kingdom. She tells him she has finally mastered king-class water magic. She advises him to consider enrolling at the Renoa University of Magic if he ever reaches a dead end in his magic. Rudeus thinks about Roxy's letter and about enrolling in the university. He decides that going to the university will be his next move, and he brings it up at dinner the next night. He asks his father if he can pay tuition for both himself and Sylphie at the University of Magic, but Paul refuses because he feels Rudeus is too young to be thinking about attending university. He cannot just stop learning swordsmanship at this age, and they do not have the funds to send both of them to the university. Rudeus asks his father's permission to get a job so he can earn Sylphie's tuition, so that he can be financially ready to sponsor Sylphie through the university. Paul grants his request unusually. As sword lessons proceed one day, a strange wagon stops in front of their house. A woman dressed as a warrior steps out. Her name is Ghislaine. They explain to Rudeus that they have found him a job in another city, and he is to start immediately. Without giving Rudeus any time to argue or think too much about it, Paul knocks him out. He wakes up in a wagon opposite Ghislaine. She tells him they will be working together from then on. Rudeus tries to come to terms with the fact that he will be working with Ghislaine. She tosses him a letter and instructs him to read it out loud because she cannot read it. It is a letter from his father informing him that his job will be tutoring a 9-year-old noble lady in Roa. He also informs Rudeus that he will be tutoring Ghislaine in exchange for her taking over his swordplay lessons. His term of service is 5 years, and he is forbidden from coming home to visit or write letters to Sylphie. Paul gives these instructions to prevent both Rudeus and Sylphie from becoming too reliant on each other. All through the journey from Roa, Rudeus thinks about his father's letter. Ghislaine and Rudeus get to Roa safely. Rudeus is shown into a living room and notes that a large number of the servants are beast people. He meets the mayor of Roa, Philip Grey Rat, who is also his father's cousin, and the father of the noble lady Rudeus is to tutor. Philip asks Rudeus what information he has about the job, and finds out that Paul did not equip Rudeus with enough information for him to carry out his duties well. Philip takes it upon himself to tell Rudeus about his daughter so he is better prepared when he meets her. Philip's daughter, Eris, is intense, which scares Rudeus a little bit, but he decides to bite the bullet and introduce himself. Eris is not impressed, and she yells at him. He talks back to her, and then she slaps him for talking back. He slaps her back, and she punches him and beats him up. He sends her flying using wind magic and runs for his life. Somehow, Rudeus makes it back to where Philip is, and pronounces Eris the most vicious creature he has ever seen. Realizing he is talking to the girl's father, he backtracks and corrects himself by calling her a fiery and compassionate young lady instead. Philip expects Rudeus to be packing his bags and heading home at this point, but Rudeus is determined. Philip asks him what his plan for getting Eris interested in learning is, and Rudeus proposes putting on a show to trick her into wanting to learn by herself. Rudeus tells Philip what he needs, and they put their heads together and hatch a plan. Rudeus takes out Roxy's amulet and prays for the success of the plan. The highlight of Rudeus's plan is a fake kidnap. He and Eris are kidnapped, and Eris, true to form, yells and manages to attract the attention of one of their captors. He barges into the cell and yells at her to keep quiet. She insults him, and he leaps on her and beats her. Rudeus gets punched too for looking the way he does, and the captor, having exercised his force of will, leaves the cell and locks it. Eris, in pain, promises to rain down revenge on the man, and Rudeus heals her wounds. He stands by the door and listens to their captor's conversation, and it makes him nervous. He begins to think it is a real kidnap. Rudeus takes off the window bars using earth magic and attempts to escape. He bargains with Eris and agrees to rescue Eris if she promises not to tell or hit him. The bargaining gets a little loud, which draws the attention of their captors, but Rudeus bars the doors using earth magic. Eris wastes time, and it is not until their captors have almost forced their way inside the cell does Eris agrees with Rudeus. One jump and they are gone just as the chief captor bursts through the door and the earth magic barrier using wind magic. Their captors lead a chase when they find them gone and almost find them because of Eris and her yelling after Rudeus heals her completely. Rudeus leaves her there because she broke her promise, but she follows him when she hears their captors in hot pursuit. When they get away from their captors, they find a coach to take them back to Roa. When they get to Roa, they see one of the mayor's house staff, and Rudeus approaches him to talk to him when Eris is snatched away again. Rudeus races to find her. When he does, he attacks her captors with magic and manages to wrest her from their hold. The men are manor servants and they offer Rudeus gold to join them. He refuses their offer because he has principles. He blinds them with a flash and then fights them with magic. He jumps in front of Eris to protect her and is nearly killed by a captor's blade. Thankfully, Ghislaine jumps in to save the day, deflecting the weapon and taking off the man's head in one fell swoop. Rudeus is shocked by this action. Rudeus thanks her for coming to save them. The conspiracy is revealed to Philip. Eris is upset, and Rudeus thinks he has failed at motivating her to want to learn. He walks away, and Eris decides to accept him as her tutor. She also grants him special permission to call her Eris instead of Lady Eris like all the other servants in the manor. Philip congratulates Rudeus for a job well done, but he apologizes instead of accepting the compliment. He asks why the captors were interested in him as well, and Philip explains that there are many uses for a member of the Greyra family, both politically and physically. Philip assures him that his involvement will be off the record, so it does not draw too much attention. The official story is that Ghislaine heard their cries and rushed to their rescue. Philip's wife, Hilda, walks into the parlor and Rudeus introduces himself to her, bowing in the courtly way Philip taught him the previous day. She sighs at him and leaves the parlor. Another Grey Rat barges in to see Paul's son. Rudeus introduces himself to the man, and the man remarks that Rudeus is too polite to be Paul's son. He permits him to stay in the manor. The man is introduced by his butler, Alphonse, as the liege lord of Fitoa, Lord Soros Boreas Greyrat, Philip's father, and Paul's uncle. Lord Soros interrogates Rudeus about his role in saving Eris, and Rudeus tries to tell him the official story and gets yelled at. He then tells Lord Soros that Philip said he shouldn't take credit. Lord Soros calls his son, who kneels before him. Sorrows give him a punch that sends him flying across the room. He scolds Philip, and Philip has no choice but to explain his reasoning to Lord Soros. Lord Soros asks Rudius to teach Eris how to use magic. Rudius agrees to tutor Eris, but states that he would prefer if Eris asked him herself. He explains why it would be better that way, and Lord Soros yells for Eris. She makes her way to the parlor, and Lord Soros yells at her and tells her to ask Rudius to teach her magic herself. She proceeds to ask Rudius in what she thinks is a polite way, but is just mimicking her and trying to be cute like the beast people. Rudius does not like it, and he yells at her for her weird behavior. Rudius teaches Ghislaine mathematics, and Eris, left to her devices, sets part of the mansion on fire as she demonstrates her control of fire magic. Rudius puts out the fire and gently scolds her, and she runs off to hide. Rudius has been tutoring Eris for about a month, and he has had to deal with a lot of running and hiding when things do not go her way or when she is scolded. She runs off once again, and Rudius finds her asleep in the barn. He tries to wake her up the normal way, and then tries to wake her up by fondling her breasts. Neither of them works. And then Rudius gives in to his lecherous nature. He tries to take off her panties and her eyes pop open as soon as his hands go up her skirt. She pummels Rudius for the umpteenth time. Rudius reports his frustrations to Ghislaine, whose solution to the problem is for both she and Eris to be taught together. Combined classes begin, and Eris is as disruptive as ever. During one class, when Eris says she is bored, Ghislaine tells her the story of her early years as an adventurer, and why she decided that she needed someone to teach her reading and math. The story holds Eris spellbound and motivates her to continue with her lessons. Rudius spars with Eris under Ghislaine's tutelage, and once again, Eris beats Rudius. Ghislaine points out his weaknesses, and he tries to explain them to her. She asks him to fix his flinching. Eris spars with him again. Even though he is exhausted and he whines about it, he gets up to work on his swordsmanship. Sadly, his victory over getting Eris to pay attention in class is short-lived, as she goes back to her intense, violent ways. Rudius, Eris, and Ghislaine get a rare free day and decide to spend it in the city. As they prepare to go out into the city, Rudius takes it upon himself to remind Eris of the rules. He compliments her outfit and she punches him yet again. When they get to the market, Eris runs from stall to stall, excited about the sounds and smells and the unique offerings of each stall. A merchant propositions Rudius. He tries to sell an aphrodisiac to him. Rudius asks the merchants questions about the aphrodisiac, and Eris comes to accost Rudius. Rudius has a book in his hand and is writing down the prices of goods in the markets. Eris demands she explain what he's writing, and he does. He explains that he is writing down and comparing the prices of goods at different stalls. He gave his students a math problem, and predictably, Eris got it wrong. Ghislaine gets it right, and Eris does not understand why it is wrong. Rudius goes to look at books, and Eris offers to buy the one he's looking at for him. When he asks her if she has any money, she replies that she'll get her grandfather to buy it for him. He rejects her offer, and she asks why. He tells her that she doesn't have any right to spend money that she doesn't earn. This opens up a conversation about money and value. He tells her what he earns, and when she is shocked, he explains to her why he earns such a small salary. Rudius suggests that she ask her father to give her an allowance, and she is excited about having money of her own. As they walk home, Rudius spots the fortress of Perogius the Dragon King, and is alarmed. Eris and Ghislaine tell him the story of Perogius and Lapis. They explain how Perogius defeated Lapis in the war that ended 414 years before. Rudius thinks about the war. Rudius notices that Eris becomes a better student when she gets regular breaks. Eris uses her allowance to buy the aphrodisiac potion the merchant was selling, and she presents it to Rudius. She also proclaims that she is better at math now and can calculate properly now. She is curious about the potion, and asks Rudius what the potion is for. He tries to change the subject by running away from her, so she employs Ghislaine's help to catch Rudius. The potion bottle shatters in the struggle, and he blurts out that it is an aphrodisiac. The women shake their heads at him, and his punishment is being tickled by Eris. Ghislaine and Eris spar viciously in the snow. Seasons have changed, and now it is winter again. Eris parries Ghislaine's attacks, and Ghislaine compliments her speed and prowess with a promise that if she keeps up her performance, she will be able to move up to the advanced ranks. Rudius teaches both Eris and Ghislaine magic and arithmetic, and they take to it quickly. Time passes, and Eris's mother still turns her nose up at Rudius, and he never fails to wonder why. Rudius is proficient at carving figurines, and he marvels at the carving that he has made of Roxy when a knock comes at the door. He opens the door to an older lady, who introduces herself as Edna Raver. She tells Rudius that she has come to consult with him about Eris's lessons. Rudius is excited to talk to Edna Raver. Ms. Raver tells him that it will soon be Eris's 10th birthday, and Lord Soros wants to throw her a party. She explains that this party will have nobles in attendance, and Eris will be expected to present herself in the best light in matters of courtesy and dancing. She tells him that the highlight of the ball will be the dance led by Eris, and that Eris needs time to master courtesy. She requests that Rudius give up some of his lesson times during the week, so she can instruct Eris on the finer arts of courtesy and dancing. Rudius is overjoyed and quick to say yes, because this means that he has time off from her yelling, punching, and beating. learning. Rudius is glad for the time off and decides to explore the library. Paul takes him around the manor libraries, explaining the sections to him. There are books in many foreign languages, and Rudius decides to learn a new language to fill his free time. As there are many beast people in the manor, he decides to study the beast god language to be able to better seduce them. He also decides to study the demon language, just in case he ever needs it one day. Studying demon god does not come easy to him, and Rudius finds himself stuck. He writes to Roxy about his new job and the languages he is learning. As winter turns into spring, Rudius does not get better at the demon language. One afternoon, he is trying to puzzle his way through a book written in the demon language when he hears Eris slamming a door and running off in her usual fashion. Edna comes to Rudius to entreat him to help her with Eris and convince her to return to her lessons since he is the only tutor that is stuck with her. Rudius agrees to help Edna and goes off to find her. He finds her sitting on top of a large bale of hay. He has no idea how she got up there and sits at the bottom of the bale of hay. He talks to her about returning to her dance lessons, and they have a conversation about people forcing her to do things. Rudius helps to frame her responsibilities in another light and offers to help her. Surprisingly, his speech helps, and he finds himself roped into attending a dance class with Eris. Edna has Rudius partner with Eris, and the first attempt is a disaster as she throws him across the room in a fit of pique. Dance class turns out to be torture for Rudius. Meanwhile, Rudius sells his carving of Roxy to a traveling merchant in the market. He spends more time with Eris in dance class, and the demon language still stumps him. Rudius gets a package from Roxy along with a letter. The package contains a demon god textbook, handwritten by the water mage herself. She illustrates all the words, their applications, and their meanings. It is immensely helpful to Rudius. One day, Eris and Rudius manage to make it through a dance class without incident, earning a compliment from Ms. Edna Raver. The party for Eris's 10th birthday is a grand affair, with noblemen and ladies from different places congregating in the manor's ballroom. Everyone is dressed to the nines, including Rudius. He has his hair slicked back and is wearing a formal coat which makes him look every bit a nobleman. He makes a beeline for the buffet table in a bid to sample all the delicacies on offer. Eris is escorted into the ballroom by her father and grandfather, and all conversation ceases. She has her hair done, and she is wearing a gorgeous dress. She looks rather uncomfortable because she is too conscious of everyone in the room and of doing or saying something that could cause embarrassment to her family. Eris is announced and she curtsies to the crowd of well-wishers, albeit a bit mechanically. Rudius watches her and notes that she looks uncomfortable. After the introductions, Lord Soros, in his usual merry way, challenges anyone who wishes for the favor of the Boreas house to take Eris's hand for the first dance. At first, it seems like no one wants to step in until a brave noble boy asks Eris to dance. Eris's nerves show from the beginning of the dance, as she goes faster than the preferred tempo of the song. Many mishaps happen in the space of that first dance, ending with Eris on the floor. Guests start to whisper about Eris. Rudius decides to step in to save Eris from the vicious whispers of the nobles. He asks Eris for a dance and she accepts. She makes mistakes in the first half of the dance, her most prominent being dancing faster than the music. Rudius asks her what the problem is, and she explains it to him. Rudius watches her and realizes that she has all the steps memorized, but has trouble with the timing because she is nervous. So Rudius asks her to close her eyes and perform the steps of the dance like it is swordplay. The dance goes smoothly from then on, and Eris starts to enjoy herself dancing with a flourish. The dance ends without anyone being thrown to the floor or being punched. Everyone cheers for Eris and Rudius. Edna corners Rudius and asks him how he achieved such an amazing result from Eris, and he explains it to her. The young ladies at the ball flock around Rudius and compliment him, with most of them asking him to dance. When Eris sees him, she drags him away by the scruff of his neck. Rudius, Eris, and Ghislaine hang out in Rudius's room, where he gives Eris his present, which is a wand. Eris does not want hers at first, until Ghislaine thanks Rudius for hers. He explains the use of the wand to her. Ghislaine's present to Eris is a talisman that is supposed to protect against wolves. One of the children asks if it works, and Ghislaine tells them a story. Eris wears the talisman and promises to treasure it. When Ghislaine and Eris have gone to sleep, Rudius takes a walk through the manor. He hears the sounds of someone copulating in the tower and decides to go check it out. He walks in on Lord Soros and a beast maid. The beast maid scurries out when Lord Soros calls out to Rudius. Rudius walks up to him and they both look out of the tower. There is an object in the sky that looks ominous. Rudius asks Lord Soros what he thinks of it, and he tells him he would like to think of the thing in the sky as a good omen. Rudius gets ahead in studying other languages and is proud of himself for the progress made. He finds that learning other languages is fun. Eris has gotten to the advanced level of sword fighting and loves it. One day, Rudeus sees Eris and a beast maid smuggling something into the kitchens. His curiosity is piqued and he decides to tail them. He sees the beast maids and Ghislaine with Eris in the kitchens. Eris talks about how what they are planning is going to make him cry for sure. He figures out that they are planning to throw him a surprise birthday party. Philip explains to him why the Boreas family cannot be too public about him. The Grey Rat family dynamic is strange, and because Paul has left the Notos line, his brother is the one in charge of that line. It will be seen as an act of war by the Notos line if the Boreas line parades him around openly. It is the day of Rudeus's party. The whole manor is drenched in tension. Ghislaine is dispatched to keep Rudeus in his rooms while preparations are ongoing. When Rudeus tries to leave his room, Ghislaine tries to stop him. Since he knows about the party, he decides to test how far Ghislaine will go to stop him from leaving, so he shows her a figurine he made of her, and wonders if he can see the base of her tail so he can compare it. Ghislaine takes her pants off so he can see her tail, and they are in this position when the beast maid comes to call Rudeus down to the party. When he gets there, Eris gives him flowers. He cries about that and awakens Lord Soros's protective instinct, and he tries to declare war in the Notos line. They stop him by dragging him out of the party. Eris's mother warms to Rudeus and proposes a marriage between Rudeus and Eris. Eris disagrees and gets into a shouting match with her mother in the middle of the party. Eris presents Rudeus with a magic staff called Okwahardia, which he likes. The party is a success, and everyone enjoys themselves at the party. Philip is drunk when Rudeus goes to meet him. He tells Rudeus that Eris has 2 brothers, and that both of them are with his brother in the capital. Philip also explains that Hilda did not like Rudeus at first, because it seemed cruel to her that she was not allowed to raise her sons, but someone else's son had free reign in her household. Philip echoes Hilda's marriage proposal so that they can stage a coup and wrest power for themselves. Rudeus turns him down and goes to bed. He finds Eris waiting for him, dressed in only a nightgown. He figures that this is Philip's doing. When he tries to touch her, she is violent with him and storms out of the room. She comes back and Rudeus apologizes for trying to touch her. She tells him they can do whatever they want if they can wait 5 years. Rudeus is overjoyed but suddenly remembers Sylphie. Over in his village, Paul is dealing with monsters, and that makes him miss Rudeus's birthday party. Sylphie goes to visit Paul's household and spends time with the female members of his household. Zenith and Lilia talk about how Sylphie has changed since Rudeus left. Roxy sees storm clouds over the Osera region and is worried about what it might mean for Rudeus and his family. There is mana pooling in the distance, and creatures from different kingdoms send emissaries to investigate the phenomena. One of the rulers remarks that the cloud in the distance looks like the summoning cloud for the demon Laplace. He summons his servants and sends them forth to find who cast the spell and kill them. Rudeus takes Ghislaine and Eris to demonstrate the cumulonimbus spell to them. He tries to cast the spell and the clouds change. Ghislaine explains to him that it is concentrated mana. A man called El Monfi the Radiant tries to attack them because he thinks Rudeus is the cause of the disturbance. He says he has come on the orders of Lord Pirogius to kill Rudeus. Rudeus explains that the mana pooling has nothing to do with him. When El Monfi leaves, a bright light swallows Rudeus, Eris, and Ghislaine. Rudeus wakes up beside a crackling fire with Eris beside him, sound asleep. He tries to take stock of his situation. He recognizes the man seated across from him as a super demon and tries to use magic against him. He then tries to speak to him in the demon tongue, but the man does not understand Rudeus's question. The man explains that he watched Rudeus and Eris fall from the sky and make a fire to warm them. Rudeus asks if the demon also saw Ghislaine, but he says he did not see her. The demon asks Rudeus if he is frightened. Rudeus replies that it would be rude to be frightened of him after he rescued them. He tells Rudeus that he is strange, and Eris stirs. Rudeus introduces himself, and the demon man introduces himself as Ruigerd Superdaya. Rudeus sits close to the fire and asks the man where they are. He tells them their exact location. They are in the northeastern demon continent in the Begoya region. Rudeus remarks that they are a long way from home. Ruigerd asks how they came to be on the demon continent, and Rudeus tells him about being swallowed up by a bright light composed of magical power. Ruigerd promises to protect them and swears to take them back home. Eris wakes and screams and cries at the sight of Ruigerd. She goes to hide under the blanket she had been sleeping in, weakened by fear. She sees that Rudeus is okay with Ruigerd and musters up her courage. Eris introduces herself to Ruigerd, and he does the same. Rudeus brokers peace between Eris and Ruigerd. The three of them set out on their journey. Ruigerd takes care of them and tells them about what his third eye can do. Their travels take them to a Magurd village, and Ruigerd tries to get them in. The chief comes to take a look at the travelers, and Rudeus introduces himself to them in their tongue. The elder introduces himself to Rudeus and asks about the pendant he is wearing. He tells him about Roxy, and it turns out that is the village she comes from. Eris is fascinated by the village and their way of life, and Rudeus learns more about Roxy. During their time in the village, Rudius mulls over the mana disaster and what may have caused it. They continue their journey, and Ruigerd intends to escort them all the way. Rudius learns that Ruigerd cannot enter cities, but does not know why. He also finds out that Ruigerd saved the life of a Magerdian child and is fiercely committed to saving children and keeping them safe. Ruigerd's overarching goal is restoring his tribe's honor. Rudius asks him about the war, and it evokes strong feelings in him. Rudius persuades him to tell the story, and he does, explaining that before the final battle of the war, Lapis gave the Supered warriors new spears. The spears corrupted the Supered warriors and turned them into bloodthirsty beasts who murdered everyone in sight, both enemies and allies alike. Ruigerd explains that there are not many of them left. He talks about the toll the war took on the reputation of the Supered demons as a race. Rudeus empathizes with the Supered and pledges his allegiance to Ruigerd. He promises to help him salvage the reputation of the Supered. They are sent on their way, and the Magerdians give Rudeus a sword. Eris curtsies and thanks them, and the trio continues on their journey. Eris slays monsters violently with the new sword and munches on wild fare like she was born to be an adventurer. Rudius does not fare as well, as the food is often not to his liking. The trio set off towards the city of Rikarisu. Standing in line to enter the city, they see demons that look like animals, and Ruigerd tells them about the diversity of the demon tribes. The gatekeepers are asking about a demon called Dead End, and Rudius asks Ruigerd who Dead End is. He tells him that he is the one and offers to leap over the cliffs and make it into the city, so Eris and Rudius won't be denied entrance into the city because of him. Rudius has a better idea, and camouflages Ruigerd, and they pass through the city gates without incident. They plan to join the city's Adventurers Guild, so they can make money for their journey. They make a dramatic entrance into the city's Adventurers Guild, and introduce Ruigerd as Dead End, and this draws the mockery and laughter of the adventurers. They are unfazed and register their party under the name Dead End. They are told that they are D-class adventurers, and they have to work their way up to a higher class by taking jobs. They can take jobs in their class and the class directly above it. They go to check the job board and see that most of the D-class jobs are about finding lost pets. They see one about finding a lost kitten and are disheartened by the request and the pay. Rudius thinks about what to do. On their way out, a road demon sticks his webbed feet in front of Ruigerd to bar him from passing through. Ruigerd stares him down, and both demons reach a silent agreement. The trio leaves without too much incident and goes to find lodgings. When they get there, Ruigerd and Eris sit while Rudeus goes to pay. Some demons try to talk to Eris in the demon tongue. She is confused and she reacts violently by throwing them across the room and tearing her cloak in the process. Rudeus apologizes on Eris's behalf, and the demons introduce themselves as the Tokarabi Toughs. They have a team pose and offer to join forces with the trio. Rudeus thanks them for their offer and declines. Eris is upset about her cloak tearing, and Rudeus offers to mend it for her the next day. She is excited about that, and Rudeus thinks about how they can earn money. Rudeus awakes and gives the advice some thought. He meets Eris awake, and she shares her concerns about them making it back to their world. He reassures her and sits with her. They set out to find the lost kitten, as Ruigerd leads the way. He leads them to a cave, and they explore it. The kitten turns out to be large. They meet the demons in charge of the cave and attack them. Rudius tries to interrogate them, and Ruigerd kills their leader for injuring Rudeus. Rudius is horrified by this and tells Ruigerd to stop killing. Eris yells at Ruigerd, and Rudius begs him to stop so he and Eris won't be afraid of Ruigerd. One of the demons asks if Ruigerd is a real Supered, and Rudius says yes. The demon confesses that they kidnapped the pets and pretend to find them for the bounty. Rudius asks the demons to pair up with them so he can spare their lives. Ruigerd gets upset by that, and Rudius explains his reasoning. Ruigerd is angry and lashes out, but Eris yells at him once again and browbeats him into submission. Eris makes Ruigerd almost cry with her words. The demons do as Rudeus suggested, and he gives them instructions and threatens them in the same breath. The horseman, Nokapara, asks the two teams what they are talking about. No one answers, and he comes to his conclusions and leaves. Roxy travels to an encampment and looks for Rudius's name on the list of the deceased. When she doesn't find it, she breathes a sigh of relief and is thankful that he and his family are safe. She hears people talking about Paul and asks them if they know Paul. Paul has written a letter to Rudeus telling him that Zenith, Lilia, and Aisha are missing and exhorts him to find his way home. He tells him of his whereabouts and gives him instructions. He also asks for help from anyone who knows his family to help him find them. He gives his exact address for any correspondence. The Dead End party gets a job to investigate a mysterious monster in the petrified forest. Eris asks about the monster and is excited to meet it. They find other guild parties fighting for the job already. They decide to race the other teams, but Ruigerd is worried about the other team because he doesn't want them to die. Rudeus advises caution when tailing them, and advises Ruigerd not to rush in to save them until needed. Soon enough, the other team gets surrounded by monsters, and Rudius makes Ruigerd wait until the last minute to save them. all in the service of Team Dead End's reputation. One of the team members is attacked by the monsters, and Ruigard rushes in to save them. Eris is vicious with the blade, and the monsters are dispatched in no time. The team member dies, and Ruigard is angry at Rudeus for making him wait. He takes Rudeus to a corner to yell at him. Rudeus apologizes, but one of the other team members says it's their fault their friend died. Ruigard says children cannot be blamed, and she gets angry and tells him off. She expresses her gratitude, but she acknowledges the role she played in her friend's death. Ruigard apologizes for treating her like a child, and acknowledges the fact that she is a full-fledged warrior. She cries at that. The two remaining team members thank the Dead End Trio for accompanying them. The Dead End Trio rushes to the cry of a snake. It turns out to be a red hood cobra, and it has an adventurer in its mouth. Eris wants them to do something. They charge the snake, and Ruigard opens a gash down its side. Eris's blade does nothing to it, and Rudeus's magic attacks do not work. In the end, Ruigard holds the snake for Eris, and she cleaves it in two. Rudeus fires a spell at it, and the cobra dies. Eris celebrates their victory, but the other adventurer is dead. They make their way into the city, and Nokopara is lying in wait for them. He has figured out their plan with the other team, and threatens to report them to the guild. He asks for money from them. Rudeus thinks of a solution. He reassures Eris. He uses his magic to wash off the dye from Ruigard's hair. Nokopara catches sight of that and screams in terror, and the people disperse. Ruigard throttles Nokopara and threatens him, which proves expedient. Nokopara passes out from fear. The authorities come to arrest Ruigard, and he leaps over the cliffs and is gone, leaving Rudeus and Eris alone. Rudeus and Eris leave the city and look for Ruigard. They find him, and he apologizes to them. Rudeus also apologizes to Ruigard. Ruigard tells Rudeus that he understands him, and tells him there's no shame in being desperate to protect something. He calls Rudeus a fine warrior, and Rudeus asks Ruigard what the word means to him. He answers and talks about how warriors fight to defend the weak. He promises to stay with Rudeus and Eris, and tells him not to worry about reputation, and to focus on protecting what he must protect. Rudeus says he will help him restore the Superd's relationship no matter what. They share a laugh and a handshake. Eris sees them clasping hands, and complains that they are leaving her out. She vows to take care of the two men, and they all laugh. Rudeus shaves his head. Eris compliments his look, and Rudeus gives him a leather thong to hide his third eye. Rudeus acknowledges his flaws to the trio, and pledges to talk things out with them going forward. They have a strategy meeting. The Dead End Trio makes it to the ocean. Eris marvels at it and goes to stand at the shore. She wants to jump in and take off her armor to do just that. Rudeus's eyes bug out in the list as she takes item after item off. Ruigard tells her not to enter the water because the sea is full of monsters, and therefore not safe. Both Rudeus and Eris groan and complain about not getting to swim. Roxy travels with the people she meets who know Paul. They all used to be part of the same adventurers party in their younger days. They come off a sea voyage, and the man is seasick and stumbling around on the docks. The Dead End Trio gets recognized at the docks. They find out they have nicknames, which appeals to Rudeus's vanity until he hears his nickname. They find out Ruigard's passage on a ship will cost 200 green ore coins. They decide to think about it. Ruigard apologizes to Rudeus for causing a snag in their plans. They take a couple of days to think of a solution. Rudeus is stumped. Rudeus wakes up. Eris and Ruigard spar together. Ruigard sees Roxy and gets distracted, leading Eris to land a hit on him. She is overjoyed and yells her joy. Rudeus does as the man god says and runs across a Magurdian. He runs into another person who is begging for food by the roadside. Rudeus offers food to the person. After she eats the food, she transforms into her final form and thanks Rudeus for the food. She asks for his name and tells him her name, Kishirika Kishirisu, the great emperor of the demon world. Rudeus is unimpressed, but decides to play along with her. She is delighted by this, and he continues to flatter her. She uses her eyes to read his soul and sees his reincarnated soul. She decides to grant him one wish, because his generosity saved her life. His first wish is for fabulous wealth, but she says it is out of the question because she is flat broke. His second wish is for half the world, and she says she doesn't have it to do. He asks her to pay him with her body, but she shoots that down too. He asks what she can give him. She says he should choose a demon eye. He asks how much they are worth. She says they aren't worth any money, and asks what kind she wants to give him. She gives him the Eye of Foresight and offers to help him if he's ever in a bind. He tries to adjust to the eye and bumps into a man. The encounter leads him to push him out of harm's way before a jar falls on him from above. He tells Ruigard that he met the great emperor. Ruigard says he had no idea she had returned. Ruigard tells him about the emperor. Eris wants a demon eye and wants to go off to see if the emperor will give her one. It takes Rudeus a week to adjust to the Eye of Foresight. It makes him better at sparring with Eris. Eris congratulates him and tries to throw him down, but he catches her in a headlock. Ruigard tells Rudeus he did a great job. Rudeus is so excited that he thinks he can beat Ruigard, but he doesn't stand a chance. He tries to comfort Eris, who is jealous of his skill. He apologizes, but she says she doesn't need him to. Rudeus contemplates his situation. Ruigard catches Rudeus sneaking out to try to sell his staff, and he stops him. They have a conversation about selling precious items, and Rudeus always tries to shoulder the burden of the Dead End Trio. They talk about the options they have, and Ruigard tells him to never surrender his weapon and to consider Eris's thoughts. Ruigard tells Rudius to consider seeking passage from smugglers. The man Rudius saved comes to find Rudius and stumbles into Rudius and Ruigard's conversation. He introduces himself as Gallus Cleaner. Roxy, Talahand, and Elise walk into a tavern. Elise remarks on the quality of the men and leaves the party to flirt with a large group of men. Roxy thinks about what Elise would do if she didn't. She looks at Elise and tries to copy her posture for herself to see if it works. Talahand leaves, and Roxy is left on her own. Demons approach Roxy and ask her to join their party. She declines and tells them her rank, and that she is a king-class water mage. They recognize her, and Elise teases her about it. She asks Talahand and Elise about what Paul and Zenith were like as members of the Fangs of the Black Wolf. Both agree that Paul is trash, and they decide not to discuss him. Roxy is curious as to why they refer to Paul as trash. Roxy talks about Ruigard and the Dead End Party. Talahand gives a rundown of party dynamics, and Roxy thinks about it. They talk about their mission to find the Fatoa displacement survivors and how they want to go about it. They talk about the chances of the Grey Rats being alive, and Talahand and Elinales offer to go get intel the next day from their various sources. Roxy walks along the shore and thinks about Rudeus. She runs into Eris and Ruigard sparring. She notices her pendant around Ruigard's neck. Ruigard notices her and she sprints away in fear because she knows he is a super demon. Roxy has to pay the inn for the damages she caused and she grumbles about it as the party sets off. Elise asks her what kind of man she likes and Roxy talks about her ideal man and gets teased by Elise. Gallus, the man Rudeus saved from a falling water pot, turns out to be a smuggler and agrees to smuggle Ruigard to Xanthport if the Dead End Trio agrees to help him liberate some stolen goods when they get there. They take the deal. Rudius goes off into a long-winded fantasy about him and Eris falling in love on the boat getting shipwrecked and ending up on a deserted island where they will live happily ever after in conjugal bliss. His fantasy does not come to pass as Eris is seasick throughout the entire journey, and he has to heal her after every bout of vomiting. They make it to shore in one piece, and Rudeus settles Eris before he goes to Ruigard. Rudeus sets out to pick up Ruigard in Gallus's hideout. He sees all sorts of people and things in the hideout. Ruigard tells Rudeus that Gallus has kidnapped children, and the guards have killed one of them for crying. They make a plan to rescue the children. Rudeus thinks of a way to do that without violence, but Ruigard asks him to let him handle the guards. Ruigard exposes his supered nature, and Rudeus rescues the children. He heals their wounds. They are beast people, and Ruigard comes to help take them out. He apologizes to the dead beast child for not being able to take care of him, and Rudeus talks to the children in their language. The children make Rudeus go back for the captured dog. There is a barrier magic around the dog, and Rudeus breaks the barrier. The dog shows his appreciation by bowling him over and licking him. Rudeus is excited about the dog and plays around with him. A beast person accosts him for playing with the sacred beast and accuses him of fondling the beast and being inappropriate with it. He incapacitates Rudeus, thinking he is one of the smugglers. The best people have come to rescue the children but find them gone. They race to the Beast People's village to punish Rudeus for his imagined crime of kidnapping and selling the beast children. They do not even give Rudeus a chance to explain himself. Rudeus voices a commercial for a cell in the Beast Village, where he is imprisoned. He extols all its lovely features, such as its prime location in the middle of the village, its proximity to nature, the free and fresh air he is exposed to, its toilet facilities, and the fact that it is free because it is a prison cell. He is stripped naked and hangs in a cell in the middle of a forest. A girl comes and splashes water on him and insults him. The Beast Village is peaceful and idyllic. Rudeus waits for Ruigard and Eris to come and save him, and for the people to listen to his explanation. He wonders if Ruigard and Eris are okay while he waits for them. The Beast People throw someone else in jail, and Rudeus tries to welcome him by pulling rank and trying to intimidate him. It works, and Rudeus asks him why he got thrown in prison. The man says he was caught cheating. Rudeus asks him what he was caught cheating in, and the man explains that he was caught cheating at dice. The man introduces himself as Geese, and Rudeus introduces himself. Rudeus asks if Geese has seen Eris and Ruigard. Geese says he hasn't seen them, and sympathizes with him about being abandoned by his friends. Geese and Rudeus talk into the night, getting to know each other. Rudeus talks a bit about how he would just like to set fire to the place and escape. They get into an argument and then realize that the forest is burning. When they realize that the forest is burning, Geese asks Rudeus if he's the one who started the fire. Rudeus says no. There is a wildfire going on, and Rudeus saves the man. The forest fire turns out to be caused by the smugglers. The village is being attacked, and the villagers are fleeing. The attackers are kidnapping the beast children, and Rudeus decides to save the village. Geese follows his lead, and Rudeus casts a spell to bring rain to put out the fires, to ensure that nobody gets hurt by the fire. This makes him a target for the attackers. The man who threw him in prison thanks him for helping them put out the fire and asks him to help them get the children back. Rudeus agrees to help. Together, they rescue the children and run into Gallus. Gallus exposes his evil plan of kidnapping beast children and selling them for a huge profit to nobles in Fatoa. Rudius suspects that it is the Boreas Greyrat family that has been doing business with Gallus but decides not to say anything about it. Gallus and the Beastman fight it out and Gallus defeats him. Rudeus and Geese find out that Gallus is a Saint-class fighter in the North God style. Gallus holds onto a distressed beast child. The Beastman taunts Gallus and Gallus takes it in stride. Rudeus mulls over the issue. The cries of the child get to Rudeus, but before he can act, the sacred beast comes on the scene to fight Gallus for having the audacity to steal their precious children. Rudeus uses the Eye of Foresight to give him an advantage over Gallus in a fight. The fight begins, and Rudeus ends up getting stabbed in the thigh by a knife that Gallus throws at him. The sacred beast does not relent in its attacks. There is an explosion, Gallus is defeated, and Rudeus collapses from a loss of blood. Rudeus awakes to find Eris and Ruigerd in the beast village. The beast people ask for his forgiveness and express their gratitude. He asks Eris about what happened to them during the week he was imprisoned. They explain to him all the events that transpired and how they found him. Over in Fitoa, Boros is sentenced to death for dereliction of duty. The nobles believe that the mana disaster is somehow his fault and blame him. The region of Fitoa is handed over to another lord, who looks on smugly at the scene before him. He is tried and found guilty. He seems resigned to his date as he kneels to accept his punishment. He wishes Eris well before he is beheaded. Over in the beast village, Doldia, Eris enjoys playing with the beast girls. They marvel over her muscles, and Rudius is caught hiding and watching the girls by the sacred beast and is threatened by the village elder's son. Eris teaches the beast girls how to fight. Rudeus tries to teach the sacred beast how to count, and Eris tries to teach the beast girls the human language. Rudeus is amazed at that and is proud of that. Tona's father asks about the ring on Eris's finger. She tells him that Ghislaine gave it to her. Rudeus describes Ghislaine to them and is met with silence. Tona's father is surprised she is alive and explains what Ghislaine did and calls her a disgrace to the Doldia tribe. Tona's father drags her away and Eris runs outside to yell at him. She tells him all Ghislaine taught her and did for her. She tells him Ghislaine is her favorite person. He refuses to believe that Ghislaine is admired. Rudius tells Eris to drop the subject. Tona's father is surprised that Ghislaine has become a person worthy of respect. Tona asks about Ghislaine because Ghislaine is her aunt. Eris explains, and Tons talks about herself and what she likes. Eris advises her and tells her that there are different ways to be strong. Tona asks Eris to teach her how to use a sword. Eris agrees and wants to start immediately. Rudeus and the sacred beast watch. Gyers muses about Tona and asks about Ghislaine again. Gyers is surprised that Ghislaine is a sword king and laughs when Rudeus tells him he tutored her in basic magic for years. He tells Gyers that Ghislaine also learned reading, writing, and arithmetic as well, and is good at them. Eris and Tina spar every day, and Tina improves over the months. Eris expresses joy that the rainy season will be over, and she will get to move on. Tona asks her to stay forever, but she explains that her whole family is waiting for her. Tona is sad. Rudeus makes a figurine, and the sacred beast likes it. The beast woman guard explains that a sacred beast always appears when the world is in danger. She says that when the beast is mature, it will journey with a hero. She mistakes his playfulness with the beast as arousal, and he sets her straight. He gets called to settle a fight between Tona and Eris. Gyers removes Tona from Eris, and their friend explains that it is Tona's fault for starting the fight. Tersina tries to get her to apologize to Eris, and Gyers tells Tona that Eris and Rudius are leaving the next day. She acts unaffected. Gyers tells her about what Ghislaine was like as a child. He tells her that she was like a ruffian, and that he was glad when she was taken away by a wandering swordsman. He says he regrets his choice. He asks her if she wants Eris to leave without saying goodbye. Rudius talks to Eris about Tona. He hears Tersina and Tina outside and leaves with the sacred beast to give the three a chance to talk. Eris gives them a hard time at first, but accepts their apology. Tona gives her dolls of Rudeus and her. The next day, they load their packs to go, and the Doldia elder thanks them for their help. The girls exchange a teary goodbye, and Gyers asks Eris to spar with him. She is excited about the prospect. They spar, and they seem to be evenly matched. Gyers tells them they are always welcome in Doldia. Eris cries as they leave. Geese joins their party. Eris tells him their destination. They talk about the road they're on, the Holy Sword Highway. Geese tells them about the legend, and Eris says she wants to be able to do that. Geese talks about the monument to the 7 great powers. Rigurd contributes to the discussion, talking about how he trained to be able to defeat the powers. Eris decides to get her name on the monument, and Geese says that he is not sure the top 4 powers are still alive, and Eris is disappointed. The quartet's journey continues, taking them through places with breathtaking scenery until they get to Militia. Geese leaves them outside the holy capital city of Millis. As he bids them farewell, Eris tells him to teach her to cook next time. He asks why she wants to learn, and she hedges. Geese asks them to busy the Adventurers Guild in the city. The Dead End team has another meeting to assess their progress. Rudius thinks they should stay for a while and pick up guild jobs so they can have money. Rudius has an idea to salvage the Superd's reputation. It involves giving figurines to people they save. Rudeus asks for the next day off to make figurines and write a letter to his family. Eris wants to go goblin slaying since she has time on her hands. He asks Rygard to go with her, but she says she can handle them herself. They decide to meet again the next day. Rudeus is having trouble writing his letter when he sees someone being kidnapped. His first thought is about how he needs to stay out of it so he doesn't end up in prison, but he decides to help. He follows the kidnappers to an abandoned house. The kidnappers feed the child. Rudeus gives himself away to the kidnappers. He wears panties on his face to conceal his identity and challenges the kidnappers. He fights with them. The captain of the band comes in and tries to fight Rudeus. He tears off Rudeus's disguise, and Rudeus finds that the captain is his father, Paul. Paul looks unkempt and is drunk. Rudeus asks Paul what he's doing there. Paul asks Rudeus if he got his message. Rudeus says no, and then Paul asks Rudeus what he has been doing all the while. He tells Paul he has just been surviving. He decides to tell Paul the whole story. Paul cuts him off rudely. He says Rudeus has been playing the year away. Paul takes Rudeus to task over not trying to find out if anyone else has been teleported to the demon continent. Rudeus is left speechless and says he didn't think of it. Paul scolds him for helping Rygard and not thinking of helping other victims. Paul just takes him over the coals. This makes Rudeus angry, and he talks back. Paul insinuates nonsense, and Rudeus gets even more angry. He takes Paul to task over his new woman, and Paul punches him in the face. Paul asks Rudeus if he passed through Xanthport. Rudeus does not know what Paul is talking about and says so. Paul tries to attack Rudeus, but he uses his eye of foresight to anticipate Paul's every move and gets his father flat on his back. Rudeus punches Paul, each punch punctuated by his anger. Rudeus goes to continue punching Paul, but is pushed off by Norn, who tells him to stop bullying Paul. Rudeus is walking out of the hideout when Paul tells him that he was not the only one who got teleported, and that everyone in their village also got teleported. This stops Rudeus in his tracks. Paul says he left messages in the Adventurers Guild in Xanth and Westport. He asks Rudeus why he didn't read them. He tells Rudeus that while he was off enjoying his vacation, people died. Rudeus is taken aback and berates himself for not thinking ahead. It dawns on Rudeus that if his whole village got teleported, Sylphie must have also been teleported. Paul Ryo's into him again, accusing him of being more worried about his girlfriend than his mother. Paul tells him there's no trace of anyone, and that the purpose of the search and rescue squad is to find those missing people. Rudeus asks why the search and rescue squad is kidnapping people. Paul tells him that because the people were teleported to all the corners of the world, sold into slavery and manipulated, they had to resort to forced liberation. Paul tells Rudeus that he expected him to have pieced the situation together and started rescue efforts a long time ago. He berates Rudeus again for going around, sightseeing. Rudeus is downcast. He goes back to his lodgings and decides to join forces with Paul. Eris comes back and meets Rudeus looking sad. Rudeus explains what happened, and Eris is indignant. Rygard tells Eris to comfort Rudeus. She tries, but she isn't able to say anything to him. She hugs him instead and tells him she's here for him. She apologizes for not being good at comforting, and Rudeus tells her she's doing great. Paul is in the village. He holds Norn in his hands, and she tells him she doesn't know where Zenith, Aisha, and the house are. All Paul can see before him is a flat wasteland. He thinks about what caused the village to disappear. They try to get to the house. Paul is drinking in the middle of the day. Geese comes to meet him and tells him to swing by the guild if he wants to see a familiar face. Geese asks him what happened to him while he was gone. Paul tells Geese, who tells him he's expecting too much from Rudeus when he's still only just 11. Paul still thinks Rudeus has it easy. Geese tells him he's in the wrong. He tells him what the demon continent is really like, to give him context to Rudeus's journey. Paul asks Geese why Rudeus would act like it was a big adventure when it was a taxing endeavor. Geese tells him Rudeus probably did not want to make him worry. Paul is upset, and Geese tells him the truth. Paul is still bitter but thinks about what Geese is saying. Geese tells Paul to just be happy to see Rudeus again because he's here and safe. He tells Paul to think about the issue again when he's sober. Paul sits at Norn's bedside and imagines Rudeus in distress. The thought bothers him so much, he tries to sober up. Across town, Rudeus eats breakfast. Paul comes to see Rudeus, and Eris wastes no time reading him the riot act. Rygard takes her away and tells Paul not to be too harsh on Rudeus. Paul initiates the conversation by asking about Rygard. Rudeus asks Paul why he has come to see him. Paul says he has come to apologize for the previous day. Rudeus tells him he was right to be upset at him, and that he should be the one to apologize. Rudeus says he had it easy in the demon continent. He also says he feels terrible that he never saw Paul's message and asks Paul what the message said. Paul tells him that it was an instruction to search the northern central continent. Paul asks him what he intends to do next. Rudeus says he wants to escort Eris back to her house. Paul says that there is nothing there anymore, that it's all grassland. He also tells Rudeus that there's a chance the Boreos family is not alive anymore. Rudeus says they will go anyway, and after that, he will look for Zenith, Lilia, and Aisha. Rudius makes to stand up, signaling the end of the conversation when the barkeeper places a tankard of drink in front of him. Rudius thanks him, and he tells him to look his father in the eye. He catches Paul making a face at him, and asks why he's making a face. Rudius thinks the face looks familiar, and recognizes it as the face he used to make in his previous life, around the time when he stopped going out. Rudius pitches an idea, for the two of them to act like grown-ups and pretend the previous day never happened and to start completely over. He makes Paul hug him and tells him he misses him. Paul tells him he misses him too and cries. He explains how he felt during the time they were separated. Rudius cries too and the reunion is complete. They talk about their lives and have a great time catching up. Eris and Ruigard come back and Rudius tells her he is reconciled with his father. He explains to Eris why he made up with Paul, and Paul apologizes to Eris and Ruigard. Rudius heals Eris's bruise and they have a strategy meeting. Rudius explains to them that Paul has given them money and a letter of introduction, so they don't have to stay in the city anymore and can continue their trip to the central continent with no worries. Rudius tells Eris news of their homeland, and she is surprised. He tells her that her father and grandfather are missing and that no one has heard from Ghislaine. Eris says she was prepared for that much. Rudius proposes to leave the next day. Eris agrees, and Ruigard asks if he is sure. He gives a satisfactory answer. Paul and Norn see Rudius off. Ruigard talks to Norn about cherishing her siblings, and the dead-end trio continues their journey. Geese appears, on his way to continue the search for Paul's family. Paul calls a meeting of the search and rescue team. The dead-end trio is on a ship heading towards the central continent. Eris is still seasick, and she begs Rudius to heal her, but he too is seasick. Ruigard is unaffected, and Rudius is happy that Ruigard is not a stowaway this time. This is due to Paul pulling some strings. Rudius sends some light jabs at his father, and Ruigard calls him out on it. They talk about the kingdom they're passing through, and how it's the biggest rice producer in the region. They talk about eating rice, and Rise brags about his prowess. Eris is unimpressed, and tells Rudius that if he is well enough to talk about food, he is well enough to cast healing spells on her. He runs through the agenda for the trip one more time, and thinks about all their missing family members, and he heaves over the side of the boat one more time. Roxy is in a tavern talking to Nokopara about Blaze. They are old friends and talk about the changes that have happened to both of them. She agrees with Nokopara's estimation of her growth, and she talks about what has changed in his life. He tells the story of how he got burned by Dead End. The mention of Dead End puts Roxy in a panic, and Nokopara takes her to task for not going to see her parents. They get into an argument, and Nokopara talks about his family to tell Roxy that her parents still want to talk to her. She rejects his pep talk, but decides to go to Magurdia to see her parents. She lists all the changes that have happened. She cannot communicate via telepathy, so she feels she is not welcome there. She talks about how she feels about her village. She hears children laughing and finds them playing a game. She smiles at them and continues further to look at the drawings she etched as a child. One of the children gets hurt, and she rushes to tend to them. She says a healing spell, and the children try to thank her telepathically, but it doesn't work. She runs away and hides behind a house. She looks up and sees her house. She goes in and greets her mother. They tell her about the stories they heard about her from visitors. Her mother and father ask her to stay a while before she leaves. Then they go back to talking to each other using telepathy. She tries to leave because she feels out of place. She tells her parents she has an urgent job that requires her to leave immediately, and that she might not ever be back when they ask when next they will see her. Her mother asks if she can visit every 20 years. But she says she will stop by in the next 50 years. Her mother is excited by this, and tells her they'll be waiting for her. Her mother cries her eyes out and apologizes for crying. Roxy sees her childhood doll and remembers simpler and happier times. She also remembers not being able to understand telepathy, and how she felt when she realized she was different. She says she ran away from home because she thought they would be happier without her, but she doesn't think so anymore. Her mother's crying makes her cry, and she apologizes for leaving without saying anything. Her mother hugs her, and her father joins the hug. She thinks that words and language are not the things that matter most to her family. Roxy wakes up to her parents sitting around the fire. They exchange pleasantries and have breakfast. Her father asks her if she is planning to leave that day, and she answers yes. She tells her parents that she is looking for her friends who have gone missing. Her father tells her about Rudeus's visit to the village. She is shocked to hear about Rudeus, Eris, and Ruigard and faints. Her parents send her off, and her mother asks her to bring Rudeus. Her father objects, and Roxy and her mother share a laugh. Roxy doesn't understand how Rudeus could be traveling with a Superd. She puts together the pieces and concludes that they are the Dead End trio. She gets to her clubhouse and blasts Ellen Elise and her lovers once again. They decide to head for the northern shore to find Zenith, Lily, and Aisha. The trio gets to Sharoon, and Eris gushes about their capital. Rudius thinks about the man-god's instructions. Rudeus looks gloomy, and Eris picks up on it and asks. He tells her that he heard that some of his family members have been taken captive in Sharoon. Ruigard asks, and Rudeus explains to them. Rudeus asks for help gathering information about his family. Rudeus writes a letter and sends it. Rudeus strolls through the market looking for the alleyway from his vision. He notices someone tailing him and goes to a safe place. He finds the scene the man-god described to him. The men holding Aisha see him him and try to explain, but he asks questions. Aisha runs to him and asks for help. He uses magic on the guards and they call for other guards. The guards surround Aisha and Rudius and try to get them to surrender. He tells Aisha to hold on tight to him and then flies them out of there. The guards are stunned. Aisha introduces herself to him, and he introduces himself to her as the Moonlight Knight, following the man god's instructions. She likes the name. Aisha asks him to help her send the letter to her father. She explains that she has tried to contact Paul before, but the people in the castle won't let her. He asks her if she has someone to count on, like a friend or a brother. She says she has a brother, but she can't count on him. He asks her why, and she explains about a box her mother treasured which had panties in them. She is horrified that her brother was devoted to a pair of women's panties, and before he turned 5 years old. She tells him all she knows, and she announces that her older brother is a pervert. Rudius understands why the man god instructed him not to tell Aisha his real name. She asks him his real name, and he tells her it's a secret, but tells her that most people know him as the kennel master of the party, Dead End. She is awed by this, and wants to hear the story. Rudius deflects and goes to save Lilia. He tells his party to call him the Kennel Master in front of Aisha. He explains why when Eris asks, and he has a plan to show Aisha his good side. They plan to storm the castle, and Rugard and Eris are raring to go. But Rudius stops them in their tracks to wait for guidance first. Rudius is awoken by a member of the Prince of Sharoon's Imperial Guard, who introduces herself as Ginger York. She is sent to accompany Rudius to the palace on Roxy's summons. He makes haste and wakes Eris in the process. Eris asks for a formal introduction. Rugard asks him if he is fine, and he says yes. Eris slips and mentions Rudeus's name, but Aisha does not hear her. Rudeus is an aoi of the size of the palace. Ginger tells Rudeus all that Roxy has spoken of him. They enter the palace through a side entrance. Ginger takes Rudeus's staff and bag. She starts to tell him something, but stops herself. She announces Rudeus, and a male voice tells him to enter. It is the Prince of Sharoon, and he has Lilia bound at his feet. He captures Rudeus and binds him with barrier magic. The prince taunts Rudeus and asks for Roxy. The prince tells him that he intends to use him as bait for Roxy. He mistakes Rudeus for Roxy's lover, and Rudeus tells him that he is not Roxy's lover, but her apprentice. And this seems to fire the prince up even more. He tells Rudeus his nasty plans for Roxy, which include bearing all his heirs against her will and killing Rudeus in front of her. Rudeus asks him how he will get the word out to Roxy. He has no plan for that, but figures that she will get herself back to Sharoon one way or another. He leaves Rudeus in captivity and dispatches his guards to look for Aisha, threatening them in the process. Rudeus listens to this, and then tries to mentally retrace his steps to see where he might have made a wrong turn. The episode starts by showing what Rudeus's family was doing during the mana explosion, and how Lilia managed to save Aisha. They end up at the bottom of the river, and Lilia swims up to safety with Aisha. They walk until they get to the front gates of the Sharoon capital. Lilia walks to the castle gates and requests an audience with Roxy and is overheard by Pax, who locks them up. This explains how both Lilia and Aisha end up serving Pax in the palace of Sharoon. Rudius lies in the protective circle of the barrier magic and extols the merits of his cell in boredom. He tries to break the barrier and fails, then sends up a prayer to Rugard and Eris to rescue him. The door opens, and a tall, lanky figure makes its way down the stairs to where Rudeus is. He introduces himself as Zanoba, the third prince of the Sharoon kingdom. He asks Rudeus to state his name. Rudeus does just that, and asks why Zanoba is in his cell. Zanoba asks him where he got the demon figure that he carved. He lies and tells him he stumbled upon it during his travels in the demon continent. Zanoba huffs at him and says such a masterpiece could only have been made by demons. He asks Rudeus if he knows who the artist is. Rudeus denies knowing the artist. He says he saw the figurine and liked it without asking for specifics. Zanoba then brings out the figurine he carved of Roxy. He tells of how his brother bought it, and about how Roxy left the court. He then goes on a long spiel about the features of the figurine and how erotic it is, including the detachable robe and how she has 3 arms. He fanboys about the figurine and the mastery of it. Rudius is excited, but notices that the mole under the figurine's armpit is missing. Zanoba explains that he shaved the mole down because it was distracting from the beauty of the figurine. Rudeus is aghast and explains to Zanoba why the mole is out there. Zanoba is upset about defiling a priceless work of art. Rudius offers to fix it, and Zanoba confirms that Rudius is the artist. He bows before Rudius and asks him to leave to call him master. He wants to seal his loyalty with a kiss, and bumps into the barrier with his lips instead. He whines about the barrier and cries about not being able to get to his master. Elsewhere in the palace, a guard says a secret code phrase and a door is opened up to him. He leads Aisha, Rugard, and Eris down the steps, and thanks Eris and Rugard for helping them on such short notice. Eris demands to know where Rudius is, and the guard tells her. He explains to her and Ruigerd that they need their help to rescue their families. Ruigerd asks for more explanation, and the guard explains that Prince Pax took their families hostage to gain more military might. Aisha explains his motivation to Eris. The guards tell them that their hands are tied and they need their help. Eris agrees, but Ruigerd tells her to stay with Aisha. He tells Eris that guarding Aisha is a vital duty, and Eris agrees to stay. When the guard tries to guide him, Ruigerd refuses his help, saying that he has already found them. Zenoba looks for the mechanism to trigger the release of the barrier. Rudius asks if any of his subjects are barrier experts, and he tells him that he doesn't have any subordinates, and trades Ginger to Pax in exchange for the Roxy figure. Rudius thinks that Zenoba is a moron like his brother, and remarks that he's going to stay trapped there forever, and he'll never teach him what he knows. Zenoba is devastated and wails about it. Rudius tells him that if he can find someone to get him out of there, he will take him on as his apprentice. Zenoba says he merely has to do something about Pax, and he promises not to keep him waiting for long. Eris and Aisha see the palace guards running around with hot iron restraints, and she asks Aisha what that is. The guards with them are called up for an emergency, and Aisha explains that there's a madman in the castle, and the equipment the guards are carrying is used to restrain him when he loses control. She explains that this person is a blessed child, and blessed children are born with some form of unique ability, and this one has incredible physical strength. He is prized as a highly useful military power, so he is valued highly by the kingdom no matter what he does. She says that when he was 3 years old, he ripped his baby brother's head off and now decapitates anyone who displeases him. Eris is amazed at his strength and wants to fight him. Just then, they hear Pax's screams. The guards surround Zenoba, begging him to release Pax, but he drags him to the dungeons and dangles Pax in front of Rudeus. Ginger rushes in and demands that Zenoba unhand Pax. All the guards and Eris watch this spectacle unfold. Zenoba tells Pax that if he wishes to save himself, he should release Rudeus. Pax refuses to, and Zenoba squeezes harder. Ginger begs Zenoba to unhand Pax, and Pax threatens her family. Eris scoffs at Pax and tells the guards that Ruigerd is rescuing their families. Ginger sets down her weapon and resumes her loyalty to Zenoba, who threatens to decapitate Pax. Pax agrees to let Rudeus go. Zenoba lets him go, and breaks Pax's hand for good measure. Rudeus is freed and the guards get their families back. Rudeus explains the backstory. Rudeus walks up to Aisha and pats her hair. Zenoba runs to Rudeus and throws him in the air. He lands on his back, painfully. Aisha asks Eris to tell her about their adventures, and she obliges. Rudeus loads the wagon. Lilia presents Rudeus with his box of treasures. He sees a strange pendant in the box and asks what it is. Lilia tells him that it is Sylphie's gift for his 10th birthday. He remembers Sylphie. Lilia hugs him, wishes him a happy birthday, and apologizes for missing it. He points out that Lilia is touching him. She calls him crass, and is happy he has not changed. She says she is happy he is alive, and he says he's glad that she and Aisha are safe. Lilia asks if Aisha has said anything disrespectful to him, and he says she hasn't. He calls her brilliant and compliments Lilia on raising her well. Lilia tells him that Aisha hasn't yet lived up to his more incredible qualities, and says she's comparatively dull. Aisha runs up to him to ask him a favor. She asks him to allow her to accompany them on their journey. She talks about how she is fated to serve her half-brother someday, and she cries that she doesn't want to. She begs him to save her. He is at a loss for words. She talks about making babies, and he cuffs her and tells her that children shouldn't talk about making babies. He takes off his neckpiece and gives it to her to keep. He tells her giving her this is leaving part of himself with her. He explains that leaving a memento with someone is reassuring, and he links it to her brother's mementos. She understands and accepts it. He smiles at her, and she is mesmerized. They share a laugh, and Lilia is pleased they are getting along. As the wagon takes Lilia and Aisha away, they wave to the trio, and Aisha promises that they will meet again. She apologizes to Rudeus for calling him a pervert and hopes he's not angry. Rudeus is surprised, and Eris says she's a smart child and saw right through him from the start. He wonders how she figured it out. Pax and Zenoba are exiled, and the kingdom claims they are studying abroad to save appearances. A figure lies in the snow, and Rudeus talks about how bad things always happen suddenly. He tells a long tale of his life, from his past life to his present life, and how things all happen suddenly. He says that no matter who you are, the fact that people suddenly die is the one true thing. Rudeus, Eris, and Ruigerd undertake an arduous journey. They see red dragons, and Eris says she wants to hunt one of those one day. Eris and Ruigerd spar together, and they appear evenly matched. Rudeus watches their vicious dance, spellbound. When they are done, he claps and tosses towels to both. Ruigerd tells Eris that she can now call herself a warrior. He tells her that she's an adult, and she possesses strength on par with the greatest warriors of their age. Rudeus agrees with Ruigerd's assessment. Eris thinks it is a dream and asks Rudeus to pinch her. He pinches her in an inappropriate place and she punches him and sends him flying across their campsite. She echoes Ruigerd's words. He tells her not to let it get to her head, and that it also means that he will not treat her like a child any longer. Their journey takes them to a snowy mountain pass where they see the dragons. Eris is fired up and wants so badly to fight dragons, but Rugard tells her to be reasonable. He lets her know that some of the great powers would not be able to fight the dragons because they operate in herds, not individually. Rugard tells them that only the most skillful gods would be able to face down a whole herd of dragons. Rudius speculates that the gods able to fight the dragons are the technique god and the dragon god. Rugard and Eris freeze, their eyes wide. Rudius is confused. He stares into the mist until he can make out the forms of two people walking towards them. They walk past them and stop. Rugard tells the other two to stay in one place and not move a muscle. Their pack animal runs off and throws itself off a cliff. The mysterious man asks if it is Rugard. Rudius uses the Eye of Foresight to anticipate what the man is going to do. The man correctly identifies Eris, but does not know who Rudeus is. Rugard and Eris ask who they are and how they know them. He says they are in a curious place, but that it is not important to him, and there is nothing he can do about it. He turns to leave, but Rudius calls him back. Rudius introduces himself to the man, who introduces himself as Orsted. Rudius asks him how he knows Rugard and Eris, and he says he doesn't get to know them. He asks Rudius who his parents are, and says that Paul shouldn't have a son, only 2 daughters. Orsted advances towards Rudeus, but Ruigard tells him to stop. He notices that Rudeus is holding eye contact with him and points it out. He asks Rudeus what he wants. Rudeus asks him if he knows about the mana disaster, but he says he doesn't know, and Rudeus apologizes. He asks Rudeus if he is familiar with the man god, and attacks Rudeus when he says that he is. Rugard shoves Rudeus out of the way, and meets the attack. Orsted calls him an apostle of the man god, while Rugard instructs Rudeus to take Eris and run. Orsted knocks Rugard out and aims at Rudeus. Eris tries to intercept the attack, but he flings her aside. He tells Eris that she has great potential, but lacks polish. He attacks Rudeus and makes him vomit blood. He gives him a message to give the man god when he dies. Eris tries to use fire magic to fight Osted, who is the dragon god. Rudius casts spells, but Orsted nullifies them. He conjures up a dragon, and Rudius conjures up purple flame to break Orsted's dragon. Orsted thinks that Rudius may rival Laplace. Orsted kills Rudius in front of Eris, which devastates her. Eris calls out to anyone to save Rudius. Rudius comes awake and retches. He asks why he is alive. Eris explains that Orsted came back and cast a healing spell on him. Rudeus is confused. He hugs Eris and she punches him lightly and cries. He apologizes to her for making her worry and she is happy he is alive. The episode starts with the image of blood dripping onto the floor. Rudius stands in the ballroom, all his family and friends around him talking and having fun. Sylphie, Roxy, and Eris are standing before him and he sees dragons. Blood runs down his face and covers his vision. A pitcher breaks and he is alone in the ballroom. It feels like time moves backward and he is in his old body again, standing in the middle of his apartment. He looks outside and sees the people from his new life standing there. He appears to be leaving them. As he calls out to them to wait for him, a hand punches through his chest, leaving a gaping hole. He wakes up and Rugard asks if he is okay. He asks Rudius about the man god, and he explains. Rudius also tells Rugard that the Superd's poor reputation is a result of a curse. He explains what Laplace did to the spears he gave to the Superd. Rugard is downcast, but Rudius assures him that the curse is fading and that cutting his hair helped. Rugard is relieved and Rudius goes back to sleep. Rudius tries to figure out one of the spells the Orsted used against him as they travel. Rudeus gets to his childhood home and sees it in ruins. He reminisces about the memories he made there. He goes to his tree and thinks of all the time he spent there with Sylphie. Ruigard and Eris come to keep him company. Ruigard announces his plans to leave. He tells Rudius that he is in debt, and that Rudius taught him that he has more options than he had ever considered or realized. He promises never to forget a second of their time together. He thanks Rudeus for helping him along. He tells Eris she has incredible talent and praises her audacity. He asks if he can treat them as children, and pats their heads. Eris cries rivers. Ruigard wants to return Rudeus's amulet to him, but he tells him to keep it. He tells them they will meet again, and walks away. This is a bittersweet goodbye for Rudeus, and he cries as well. Rudeus and Eris make their way to Fitoa, and they find tents outside the walls of the city. Eris catches sight of Ghislaine and calls out to her. Eris dismounts and runs to Ghislaine. The butler greets them and tells Rudeus to wait outside. Eris disagrees, and the butler gives her the news that her parents and grandfather are dead. She asks him if he is sure, and he tells her that her father and mother were teleported together and passed away in the conflict zone. Her grandmother was held responsible for the mana disaster and beheaded. Rudius gets upset, and Eris tells him to sit. The butler explains that Lord Philome Notos Greyrat wants Eris to be his concubine. Ghislaine asks him if he is seriously considering the proposal. He replies that his thoughts are on the Boreas family legacy and the people of the Fitoa region, and not necessarily on Eris or her feelings. Ghislaine tells Eris that she doesn't have to do what the butler says. She proposes that Eris runs away so she can be happy. Eris tells them both to shut up and go away so she can think. She sends Rudeus away too. Eris begins to cry. Ghislaine crosses names off a list and tells Rudeus that it is a list of the missing people when he asks what it is. Sylphie's name is crossed off the list and Rudeus is alarmed. Ghislaine asks if he has checked the names of the dead. He checks, and her name is not on it, so he's assured that she is alive. Rudeus is lying on his bed and staring into space when Eris asks to see him. He asks her what she wants to do. She doesn't care about the situation and tells Rudeus that she's all alone. She reminds Rudeus that she has turned 15, and he apologizes for forgetting and not getting her a present. He asks her what she wants, and she says she wants a family. She tells Rudeus that she wants him to be her family in the way of a couple. She reminds him of their promise. He thinks he would be taking advantage of her if he agreed to sleep with her. She makes her move on Rudeus, but he rejects her, and she uses a line her mother taught her on him, and he falls for it. A montage of their moments plays. The next day, Rudeus is excited about the experience he has just had. He finds out that Eris is gone. She left locks of her hair on his floor and left him a note. He runs to Alphonse to ask him where Eris is. Alphonse tells him that Eris has set out on a journey with Ghislaine and instructed him not to inform Rudeus. Rudeus is heartbroken and thinks he has been abandoned, and he cries his eyes out in pain. Eris and Ghislaine rest by a fire. Eris stirs, and Ghislaine tells her she can keep sleeping. She replies that she's fine, and it's dawn. They continue their journey. Rudeus is still sad that Eris has left him. People begin to plant their fields in anticipation of things getting better. Rudeus is back in his old life, and he is on the line for the cafeteria. Some guys cut the line and he tries to set them straight. They beat him with basketballs and decide to strip him and hang him where everyone can see. He sits alone in his room and resists everyone's efforts to soothe him. He cries because he feels humiliated and alone. Rudeus hides in his tent, and Alphonse comes to get him out of bed by enlisting his help to dig some wells and help build houses. Alphonse says he intends to report Eris's demise, and this perks Rudeus up. Alphonse says that revealing Eris's death may lead to a halt on their reconstruction efforts, so there'll be a stay on the announcements. He tells Rudeus his plan to restore Fitoa to its former glory, and Rudeus tells him to leave him alone. Alphonse explains the situation to Rudeus and reminds him that he's not the only one suffering. Alphonse leaves and Rudeus thinks about what he should have done differently. Eris slays a monster and Ghislaine asks her if she is sure this is what she wants. 3 men thank a man for helping them out. This man turns out to be Ruigerd. He tells them his name. Eris talks about Rudeus as she walks with Ghislaine. She says she wasn't afraid when he was with her. The 3 men ask Ruigerd questions about being a superd. Eris talks about Rudeus dying and how she started to worry about being a burden to him. The men are impressed by Ruigerd's gem. Eris thinks she held Rudeus back. Ruigerd tells the men that superd doesn't eat children. Eris admits that she loves Rudeus and she wants to be with him, but is not fit for him yet. She wants to become stronger so she can be his equal. Rudeus wallows some more. A wagon carrying Zenoba travels along a snowy path. Geese treks a desert path and thinks about how Rudeus would be able to conjure water to parch his thirst. Tina and Geyer spar, and he gives her tips to improve her form. The remaining 2 Takanobu warriors get a chance to visit the ocean. Someone asks them if they have met Dead End. Rudeus continues wallowing as he listens to his family talk. Talahand, Kishiriku, and Roxy participate in a drinking contest, and Kishiriku wins. Roxy wakes up at a bar and witnesses the barman threatening Kishiriku because she was not able to pay the bar tab. The barman takes her away to sell her, and Roxy offers to pay instead. This leads her to break, and Kishirika offers to reward her. Roxy demands a reward, and Kishiriku introduces herself as the great emperor of the demon world. She offers to give her a demon eye, but Roxy wants her to use her eye to find someone for her. Roxy wants her to find Rudeus's family. Paul rushes down the stairs to welcome Aisha and Lilia. Lilia breaks down in tears, and Paul reassures her. Norn looks around for Zenith, but doesn't find her. Paul explains to Norn that Zenith is waiting for Rudeus to find her. Kishirika tells Roxy that Paul, Aisha, Lilia, and Norn have been happily reunited in Millishan. She cannot sense Zenith but tells Roxy that she is on the Beggarith continent, in the labyrinth city of Repai. Roxy confirms that Zenith is alive, and then asks about Rudeus. Kishirika says Rudeus is on the central continent, and he is depressed. Roxy thanks Kishirika for her help. Roxy tells her party, and Elinalise wonders why Zenith has not contacted anyone. Roxy speculates that Zenith may be in trouble. Rudeus stews in his depression about Eris and thinks about his previous life introspectively. He decides to just keep dreaming. Rudeus dreams about his family dynamic from before. Zenith says she is sleepy, and Rudeus offers to clean up, and she accepts his offer on the condition that he wakes her when he's done cleaning. Rudeus bosses everyone around, and his mother thanks him and tells him she loves him. Rudeus wakes up and realizes that he has to go find his mother.